and the panel discussion will be moderated by our dear friend Dr. Yassar Yarar, Professor of Business and Global Society of Holt International Business School. Dr. Yassar, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Abu Dhabi for those of you who came flown in. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We're going to start. I would like to invite my fellow panelists to join on the stage, and as they join, Tarek, Johanna, and Dino, I will just start by framing this session. First of all, I think we have really chosen a great time for this forum on trade, right? I mean, you couldn't have a more interesting week in the global trade conversations. So it's going to be an interesting conversation now. We have 4 excellent panelists. I'm not going to introduce them in detail in the sense that you can look at their bios online. Suffice it to say they are leaders. And Johanna is Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. We have Özlem from the Deputy Director of the World Customs Organization. Dino from Baker McKinsey as well in the legal space, and of course Tarek, one of the champions of trade in our region and globally, Agility being a global leader. So what we plan to do before a couple of months when we set this session around is talk about global trade, technology, because we're living a technology revolution, right? A complete revolution. It will change everything we know. People like Sam Altman say in the next few years we will do things that looked like magic to our fathers, and it's true. But within this technology revolution, when we met in Davos in January, we were talking about the reordering of global trade. We talked about by-globalization, a world where we have 2 sort of big trading schools of thought between the US and China. So it was a revolution coupled with a reordering. And then last week happens, which throws everything up in the air in terms of uncertainty. So we're living a world trade reordering once in a lifetime. A lot of people are referring back to the 1930s, amidst reordering of by globalization within a revolution. So 3 axes of uncertainty. So one thing I promise you we will not do on this session is pretend to know what we're doing. What we'll try to do is figure out what's happening and give you some insights on the medium term, long term, because if you look at trade technology, you have to look long term. Within 10 to 15 years, nothing will look the same in the world of trade because of technology. Within 5 to 7 years, the medium term, a lot of things will be changing, and we have to talk about regulations and how we set it apart. In the short term, I'm going to start with the panel now about the short term. Things are up in the air, and I'm going to start with everybody with a question. I'll start with you, Johanna, and I'll sit down. What's happening? What are your views on the short term in terms of the geopolitics of medium? Is it really a reordering, or is it a negotiation tactic which will settle down and we can go back to discussing normal within 1 year?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this panel. Can you hear me? Yes?
I can, but I'm not sure. Try this one.
Okay, yeah. So yes, I do think that trade has been undergoing a number of shocks in the recent years. The pandemic is the one that comes to mind, of course, but also climate has also impacted trade in the last few years. Geopolitics, big policy shifts. So before getting actually to the current situation right now, it is important to think that in the last 10 years at the WTO, we have been observing increasing unilateral measures. Just to give you an idea, in the Council of Trade and Goods, the concerns that have been noted by members have been increasing year after year. So, trade tensions have been coming up. But before also coming to that, I think it's important to realize that trade has proven resilient, right? Throughout all of these shocks and trade tensions that we are seeing. Goods trade has been up 7% versus pre-pandemic levels and 18% since the year 2015. And we also like to focus a lot on goods trade, but it's important to also look at services trade. Services trade last year we think will have gone up 9%. And this is important because it is a big driver of prosperity and development, especially in digitally delivered services. Now, we do see, and we have noted before, geopolitical tensions and trade fragmentation, for example, between the US and China, and the recent actions that we have seen from tariffs this year, not only the recent announcement, but from the beginning of the year, is going to affect world trade. Our projections are preliminary ones, and of course subject to change, are that trade is going to fall, goods trade, by 1% this year. And our forecast was going to be almost 3% growth, so that's a 4-point drop. We're also seeing uncertainty is at an all-time high, so we definitely see turbulence ahead. But at the same time, this might change. What it is important to remember is that around 74% of world trade is under MFN, meaning under the World Trade Organization rules and regulations. This was 80 at the beginning of the year. It's gone down to 74. But it is important to understand that the world trading system, its rules and regulations, the stability it brings, is covering around 75% of world trade. And so I think one thing that we must think about as we speak throughout the day is the importance of preserving the world trading system, the importance of rules and regulations to drive down uncertainty that is really affecting everyone today.
Thank you very much. I think this is a great perspective for us and for everyone, in the sense that if we take the long view, despite all the shocks in the last 2 decades, trade is growing globally. Trade in services is growing even more. It's changing in nature, but growth is the name of the game. Yes, this year we are expecting a 4% drop, but check in again with Johanna in 1 week, and we might be looking at a 5% growth. It's that kind of uncertainty we're living now. But that's a great perspective. And on that note, I want to bring in Tariq, who's the vice chair of a major logistics firm. And I'm going to go down from the 50,000 viewpoint of the World Trade Organization, looking at global trade, to very operational level. As a CEO in the midst of this geopolitical storm, how are you planning ahead? Are you changing? Are you feeling the shocks? Is it more media shocks, or is it real? Are you seeing it on the business?
Well, for sure we're feeling it on the business. But I think it's important to give a little bit of context to understand how how we've arrived at this point. I think everybody that's been around for the last few years knows that we were going down the path of globalization. This is even before COVID. So supply chains were basically being optimized before COVID, primarily for cost, and resiliency was kind of neglected. It wasn't something that was part of the discussion in boardrooms. Along comes COVID, and obviously that really challenged that paradigm. We spent years optimizing supply chains for cost and efficiency, but not as much time was spent on actually having redundant supply chains. To make that a little even further, kind of to put into context, is globalization was already under somewhat of an attack. You could, even before COVID, there were people protesting the benefits of globalization, what have you. So there was already a kind of a political, I would say, undertone in many economies that was kind of cutting against this sort of free trade agenda that all is very important to companies such as ours, and also to everybody that's participating in the in world trade. That, to a certain extent, I think was being hijacked by local political ideas in each country. There was kind of reasons to attack globalization, but along comes COVID, and what happens? Thousands of new restrictions were introduced into the global economy. What's incredible about that is those restrictions didn't go away when COVID resolved. In other words, we talked about the increasing number of trade restrictions. Those have a momentum of their own. And I think that's the sort of thing that is really like scary when it comes to today. The sort of changes that I would imagine that if you were introducing tariffs and you were thinking, I want to change the way global supply chains work, those changes take years to come to fruition. So for example, if you were trying to change the way Apple builds its iPhones, and you want to change the entire ecosystem of the supplier universe in China, that's not something that's going to respond to the press of a button of a tariff. That's something that takes years and years to develop. So likely the current political, I would say, players are not going to be around to see the effects of this change. Which brings another point, is if you're going to actually invest around this idea of this being a new paradigm, you need to be sure that it's going to be a permanent one. I don't tend to, I think it was done so quickly and so, I would say, with not a lot of thought, to be honest, to be clear, that I don't see how any investor could actually build a long-term strategy around treating these changes as being permanent. But I would say one last thing, and it's relevant to companies, is that every day that goes by, what was enabled by the turn of a switch can only be disabled by hundreds of bilateral negotiations. I mean, that's a very important job for the WTO, but it's one thing to put these restrictions in place. It's a totally different animal to actually get rid of them. And that's the thing that's concerning me. Every day that goes by, these changes are going to be around for a long time. So,
thank you. This is fantastic. I mean, I wish we had 4 more hours today,
yes,
because I have more questions than answers. But I think we heard a few things that are worth noting down. We optimized for cost. Globalization was all about cost. Was it cheaper to produce anything? And then suddenly COVID came and we optimized. We started working on resilience. And now we're talking about resilience and local benefits. Protectionism is another word to say it. So we're rethinking all this. I think, Tariq, from your perspective, last time we met, we talked about every company now needs a foreign policy, right? You can't afford to run your business, especially a global business or a regional business, without a foreign policy. And that's a complication in business. But I think the idea of how permanent are these changes is going to be the question. We'll come back to that, because if they are permanent, then the WTO will see a lot of bilateral agreements trying to resolve the multilateral. So we'll come back to that in the second round. But I want to move to Özlem on the World Customs Organization. I guess every customs around the world is very busy now, because they have to change the numbers and crunch. So how is this impacting at least the people you deal with in governments? And again, to Tariq's points, are they taking this as the next level and the new thing? Or is it a more of a crisis management situation until things resettle? And is technology helping at all, or is this back to Excel sheets now for the time being?
Thank you very much, moderator, Dr. Yassar. Can you hear me? Okay, I think that's much better now. Okay. Thank you very much for this question, and good morning, everyone. It's a great honor to be here today at this important forum. The global landscape today presents a complex mix of challenges and transformative opportunities for customs administrations all over the world. In the short term, these disruptions are likely to impact customs operations in several ways. Firstly, the increasing volume and speed of international trade are stretching the operational capacities of the customs. And secondly, geopolitical and regulatory changes often necessitate swift adaptations of the policies, procedures, and strengthen coordinated border management. And thirdly, expectations from both the private sector and public sector for efficiency in service delivery, speed, transparency, and predictability in border processes are higher than ever. And fourthly, the greening of trade and supply chains calls for an innovative mindset that put customs at the vanguard in addressing these challenges and these realities all over the world. When it comes to the technology, yes, technology plays a crucial role in enabling customs to navigate uncertainties and maintain efficiency. And the World Customs Organization, WCO, has been proactive in this area, notably through the initiatives like the WTO joint report on disruptive technologies, as well as the Smart Customs project. And technology empowers customs to respond to short-term disruptions and short-term disruptions more agilely, and it facilitates better data utilization, more adaptive and evidence-based decision-making processes, and also enhanced coordination across the stakeholders. And technology also fosters collaboration. And importantly, as highlighted in this joint study report, technology contributes to creating a more inclusive and transparent environment, and it enhances integrity and accountability. In summary, while the short-term outlook for global trade may remain uncertain, technology provides customs administrations with powerful means to adapt and respond. And by leveraging digital tools and fostering a culture of innovation, customs administrations all over the world can mitigate the effects of disruptions, better serve traders and the public, and strengthen their customs role as facilitators of secure and efficient global supply chain. The focus now must be on responsible, inclusive, and strategic use of technology, as the ability to adapt today will define the success of customs tomorrow. And this includes, of course, delivering on its commitment to efficiency, security, and prosperity, which indeed aligns with the WCO Theme of the Year 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Özlem. I think your point on technology providing the agility to respond quickly is actually crucial, and we'll come back to that, because that assumes we all have the right technology equally. But absolutely, I mean, if you have the more technology and more data, you'll be able to respond with this more. But I want to bring Dino on this conversation. I want to stay on the short term and on the legal aspects, and two questions, sort of a double barrel. One is, are you anticipating a rise of bilateral discussions now? Are you going to be very busy helping, people? Because that's what seems to be the ask now. I mean, we saw Elon Musk yesterday in Europe saying he's, maybe the US and the EU should go to a zero situation. Like Tariq said, you put a problem or a constraint globally, then you resolve it locally with bilateral conversations. And the more important question, which I wanted to ask you before all this started, is emerging technologies have yet to have good regulations to govern them, from blockchain use to e-payments. And this happens. Is this going to set us back now on being able to reach global standards? Maybe two reactions, and then we'll move on to more details.
Sure. No, thank you for that. And good questions and good points raised earlier by the rest of the panel. I think it's kind of clear that when times are good, when things are peaceful, that's a good environment to foster innovation and collaboration. But I think when we have these kind of global tensions, issues that we have around the world today, it kind of brings a bit of retrenchment from countries and governments. They look inwards, they turn inwards, they become more protectionist, as Johanna said. And so the focus of laws and legal agreements will change. What's happening in the US is a prime example of that, the issuing of tariffs, enhanced controls and sanctions. And those controls, you talked about technology, those controls are affecting technology. The US is recognizing it is a big provider of technology, it's a leader in that market. It doesn't want its enemies, its people that it's not happy with, to have access to that technology. So it's imposing quotas and it's imposing restrictions and export controls. So that is changing the market, it's changing how we operate. But I think even beyond those kind of, sort of big ticket obvious measures, the export controls, the sanctions, the freezing orders, the tariffs, today what we are seeing is, the general environment does affect policy, it does affect how laws are developed. And when we're talking about technology, we're talking about data, This is an area in this region where data protection laws are emerging. But I think, because of the environment in which they've emerged, they are probably less focused on protection of individual privacy, as we see in the EU. But actually they have flavors of national security and national interests, and it's just an example, a sort of subtle example of, you can see that states are recognizing data is important, we want to protect it, we want to try and keep it within our borders. Cybersecurity is another area, we're seeing cyber crimes laws becoming broader, countries wanting to actually protect themselves, to be able to take action against people. So definitely it is, I think global legal environment, global tensions are shaping the laws and the legal frameworks that companies have to comply with when it comes to technology, and shaping how access to technology and use of technology as well.
Brilliant. So we're going to come back to some of the conversations around technology regulations, because having talked to many technology startups who are with us today, by the way, and there's a fantastic session at the end with the WEF about some pitches. That's the number one issue. That's the number one issue in terms of deployment, or growth, scaling globally. But I want to go back to, first of all, encouraging everyone to read the TradeTech Report. The team has done a great job putting it together. I enjoyed reading it and participating in it. Part of the TradeTech Report puts together this idea of trade islands. And the original idea of the trade islands was, we're going to move potentially in this world to islands of trade. Like 16 countries who are great, well connected, your Singapores, your UAEs, and who can flow freely within each other. Another 16 who are sort of fragmented a little bit, but form a regional coalition. Others who are left behind. And we see this island from a technology perspective. And now we're starting to see it even more by way of bilateral or region-to-region trade. So that was one scenario. And I'm going to throw it to the panel to say, are we now running to this scenario as opposed to walking slowly or sleepwalking to it? Do you think it's a reality? It's something that we might end up in the next 2 years, where we have these blocks or islands of high-speed trade, islands working together, people left behind, regional blocks? How realistic is this scenario, which is fleshed out in the report? But I want to see your reactions. Let's start with Johanna, from your perspective, because you're at the helm of the global trade, and you said it dropped from 80 to 70% who are playing by the rules. If it drops below 50, then we're in an island situation, right? Everybody has their own rules.
I said 74% of world trade is under WTO MFN rules.
Yes. So if it drops more, then everybody will come up with their own rules, right? Each island of group of nations. Just a theoretical scenario.
I think that there is a risk of the island concept in trade tech. And I think there's two sets of issues that we can look at. One is the geopolitics, geoeconomics, and the other one is just risks that come from lack of agreement on interoperability amongst countries, the more technical things. For example, also the lack of alignment between rules, regulations, which can lead to regulatory fragmentation. And that particularly can affect the blood of trade tech, which is data. Data flows, data localization requirements, restrictions. And actually, the WTO Secretariat and the OECD published a study earlier this year on what could be the consequences of increased geoeconomic fragmentation, regulatory lack of convergence. And we did foresee that there could be effects to world trade and to GDP because of this fragmentation on data flows. So this is definitely an issue. So competing regulations or non-alignment. On the other hand, we also see there is an effect to world trade and GDP growth when there are no regulations, right? Because if there's no regulations, then there's no confidence in being able to trade in the digital space. And also an effect of high concentration in trade tech. So what can we do about this? I think one is recognizing that perfect alignment might not be possible, and being okay with that, and emphasizing the importance then of a cooperative approach, of trying to align as much as possible. And I am conscious that, especially in the world of today, this looks really difficult and impossible, but I don't think it is. I really think that we must put minds and matter towards this goal of trying to find more convergence and more alignment, because the benefits are so important to be shared by all. So I don't think it's something that we need to give up on. At the WTO, like I mentioned, we have the agreements that can facilitate coming to this understanding, regulatory alignment, the agreement on e-commerce, the e-commerce work program, and others. But we also have the deliberative function that exists at the World Trade Organization, where governments can discuss not only where convergence is possible, but also what are the bigger challenges that they need to figure out how to deal with.
So I think we will, it's always fantastic to hear the WTO talk about this, because you keep having this feeling of the prisoner's dilemma, right? The game theory going on. If I will do it, if you do it, but if you don't do it, then I will lose, so who's going to do first? So Tariq, from your perspective as a business, while this game theory is happening between systems, do you see this application of trade technology and these islands of regulations hindering or supporting? Are you having to run dual or even tri systems, where something for these people, something for those people, this is how I like to treat their data? Is this adding cost to you or making life better?
So there's many different layers to that question. I think one of the funny things, I was chuckling when I was reading the discussion points that we were going to have today, is that when governments became more digital, it became much easier for them to put in tariffs and to make those kind of restrictions biting. In other words, in the past, when governments would make a decision about tariffs or customs duties, it would take them a year or 2 years to put into effect. Now, because of digitization, the problem was made worse, which is kind of an interesting paradox. But the other one is, we talk about technology helping overcome these barriers. Where, like if you read if you look at the media, apparently these tariffs were designed by AI. I'm not sure that's correct, but so in the first step, I think we were technology was kind of worked against us. But in reality, going forward, technology is going to be essential to how you respond to supply chains and how you create resiliency. The sort of technology, I'll give you an example, because I think that's always the best one. Many ships today are putting in 2 and 3 different types of propulsion systems on each ship. And the reason they're doing that is because they don't know when they pull into a port what sort of fuel is going to be available. Now, there are technologies out there today that, and one of them in particular is a U.S. company that prints a generator from a 3D printer that uses 20 different fuels at the same time. So you could take this technology, put it on a ship, and basically have one sort of fuel. You could use 20 different types of fuels, but only have one propulsion system. So these are the sorts of ideas I think you're going to see coming forward. I also think that if you're worried about your energy sort of security, then you might as well have these kind of 3D printers or like national 3D printing infrastructure, so you can make these solutions at home without having to rely on suppliers that are in China or the US or somehow being disrupted by the Red Sea.
That's a fantastic example. I hope you all keep this in mind as a mental note. This idea of 3 propulsion systems because of different port operations immediately translates to, at one point your company, Agility, might have a data center for Chinese trade, a data center for American trade, and a data center for the others maybe. So that's triple system, or maybe India tomorrow. And I think that will add complexity, but at one point you're absolutely right. We pretend that global trade is something we can all do on our own. We forget that global trade is a team game, right? You have to have somebody else to trade with, and you have to align. So we're going to come back to this idea, because I really like this idea of in the times when complexity is at its highest, innovation booms. So you mentioned these ideas of printing 3D. I don't even technically get it, although I'm an industrial engineer, but 3 propulsion systems print into one. So Aslam, this must be really complicated for world customs. If world customs can't talk to each other with the same set of data, how are you seeing it? Is there a divergence? Will we reach a point one day where customs will easily be able to share data? Or does a company like Agility have to install 16 different systems to deal with 16 different ports they arrive at? just in terms of data, let alone payments, let alone integration of all other types of complexity of technology.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Before coming directly to data sharing, maybe we should first consider the different levels of technology adoption in customs all over the world. Yes. Because this absolutely have the potential to cause frictions and asymmetries in global trade in terms of the data exchange and in terms of the daily operations as well. And for many years, for example, we have worked to support members in embracing emerging technologies. This is not something that we started today. But for example, one of the cornerstones of this work that we have been doing over the years is this study report that I mentioned previously, which explores how tools like blockchain, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies can reshape the future of border management. And building on that foundation, we also recently launched the Smart Customs project in the end of 2023. And the objective of all this work that we have been doing over the years is to reduce the digital divide among our members. WCO has 186 members all over the world, and our goal is to ensure that all customs administrations, no matter what is their starting point, can benefit from the opportunities these technologies can offer and accelerate their technology adoption journey. And as I said, at the heart of this initiative, the idea is bridging the gap by building shared understanding, expanding capacity, and also the improving access to knowledge and technology, and also the opportunities. And I want to share a few key findings of the Smart Customs survey we conducted in 2024. And this survey, with responses from about 62% of our membership, gave us a clear picture. While many members have national strategies for technology, the maturity level in technology uptake varies greatly among our members. And some of them are moving very quickly, as you can imagine, but many of our members face barriers like limited funding or insufficient infrastructure, legal uncertainty, or lack of skilled staff personnel. And our survey also pointed to 4 priority areas we must focus, and these are technical capacity building, cybersecurity, as mentioned by my colleague, IT governance, and strategic change management. And yes, when it comes to technologies, when it comes to data, when it comes to exchange of information and data timely among our members, there is a huge challenge, there is a huge problem, let's say, there. But through a blended mix of interventions, we are taking active, coordinated steps to reduce this gap among our members. I mean, the idea is where every customs administrations, regardless of their development level, can embrace innovation and benefit digital transformation. And this is only how we can build resilient, efficient, and harmonized global customs community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's worth looking at that survey you mentioned, and thank you for pointing out what we all felt, maybe inherently, that there's a growing gap. And I personally see that gap. You can see it now even. But the problem with this gap is it's not like the first revolution of the steam trains or this is moving so fast that you could be left behind, decades behind, within a couple of years. This is not, I don't think countries have 10 years to fix this. They have a couple of years to realize and get on the train or be left. It's a worrying one. I'm going to bring Dino in this because are you hearing on top of the technology gap, we're seeing also a regulatory gap, right? There's a lot of, some people are very ahead in their regulations. I mean, the UAE here, we have a great regulatory sandbox. World Economic Forum is running one with us on some regulations for trade. And then you have others who are still, not thinking about moving fast, maybe hoping for a return to normal. What are you hearing from your clients who are trying to expand globally, carrying their technologies globally? How are they dealing with this? And is it very real?
Yeah, I think it is real. I think, multinational corporations, one of their biggest challenges is global regulation, dealing with different sets of rules, dealing with, you referred to sort of trade islands, which does happen. I think, generally, when there's collaboration, when there's consistency in legislation and regulation, it's usually a good thing for business. But collaboration is easy in good times. When we have tensions, when we experience tensions, then we do see sometimes that those sort of collaborations can be quite fragile. So we saw Brexit in the UK. We've seen a lot of political change. I mean, Tarek talked about the sort of short-termism of politicians. We've seen big changes in the US, in the UK government, in France, in Germany. All of these changes mean that the priorities shift for those countries and regulatory priorities shift. And perhaps old arrangements that the previous regime participated in and found useful are scrapped or pulled out of. So I think it's that uncertainty for business that is a big problem, that kind of, what's coming next, what's around the corner. But also, that sort of general mix of regulation, which I think is inevitable. We're talking about countries who have their own interests. We're talking about politicians and regulators who have their own interests. And so, yes, they will look to collaborate where it works for them, but they're also competitive. We've got a Gulf Cooperation Council here, but it's not to say all of those, the Gulf states, they do compete with each other. It's natural. So those things raise tension and when you've got that kind of competition, then countries will start to, issue incentives, create incentives, either incentives to bring trade to them or barriers to block trade sort of outside. So it is a challenge for multinationals and our clients. Yeah, we're sort of trying to help steer them through that.
Thank you. I think one of the challenges we see is maybe businesses should stop talking about uncertainty. Because when you talk about uncertainty, that means you think there's another alternative, which is certainty, and then we're waiting for that to happen. It's like we're uncomfortable with uncertainty now, assuming that. I think this is it. I think this is as good as it gets. To quote Jack Nicholson's famous lines. This is as good as it gets. But in that sense, let's look a little bit more on the potential bright side of technology. So I'm going to shift gear and think about. I'm going to start with Özlem. What excites you most about technology? I mean, there is a scenario where customs could be much more efficient, much more fair. You could root out corruption. You could smooth out data exchanges. Are we too tech geeky when we get that excited about it, or is this a reality of we can actually make things better? What excites you the most from a customs perspective?
Yeah, thank you for this question. From customs perspective, what excites me the most is the tremendous potential that technology offers to transform how customs administrations operate today. For example, we have seen how digital tools can significantly enhance efficiency, and how technology allows customs to focus what we really must do, what really matters for us, facilitating legitimate trade, detecting fraud, and protecting society. And I am also inspired by the power of technology to support trade facilitation through digital platforms like single windows and other tools using electronic exchange of information, electronic exchange of data. And but beyond the systems themselves, what I find equally exciting is the growing nature of collaboration among customs administrations. Through the WCO Smart Customs project that I mentioned initially, we are seeing our members coming together to exchange experiences, to identify shared challenges for them, and also they work collectively toward common solutions to these problems all over the world. And when it comes to what concerns me about technologies, so one of the greatest challenge remains again the digital divide among our members, as not all customs administrations have equal access to the necessary infrastructure, funding, or expertise to adopt new tools, new technologies in the country. And another point is the responsible use of technology, another important concern that we have. It is essential to maintain the credibility and effectiveness of customs in a rapidly changing world. And another challenge we can identify is related to harmonization and interoperability. This is also about data sets and data exchange that we were talking before. And cybersecurity is again another area that requires close attention in terms of the challenges. Finally, I want to highlight the importance of change management, because technology is not just about hardwares or softwares. We should also focus to people, the customs officers, and the people who needs to use this technology. And but finally, in brief, I'm still very optimistic with the right frameworks in place and with strong international cooperation in this area, with capacity building in terms of the technological adoption. We can bridge the gaps among our members in terms of the customs administrations, and we can make technology a true enabler of more efficient, secure, and inclusive supply chain. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. I think this is a overall optimistic note on technology. Yes. I was in a session a couple of weeks ago with technology firms who were unbelievably optimistic. And that's the problem, I think, is that the technology firms and the people driving technology development and our adoption as a society is about 2-3 years ahead of our ability to regulate it for fairness and include. So there's this gap that we have to reduce. So that's why WCO and WTO are unbelievably important. But I'm going to come to Tariq for you to give us your also optimism or best case scenario for these technologies. Because if I was in your shoes, I'm going to think I have to now comply with more standards. I have to manage more data centers. That's adding to my cost. I'm in already a thin industry with thin margins. I'm going to have to adopt more technological advancements and multi-operability. It's easier for customs now to increase and change on us because you said it's faster. It doesn't sound like technology is good for the business of trade. Well, I'm sure it is, but I would like you to tell us what you're most optimistic about.
So, don't quote me on this, but obviously this chaos in the supply chain is actually very good for business. When companies are scrambling around looking for alternatives to adjust their supply chain, usually that means they're doing things that are no longer, they're not making strategic decisions, they're making spur of the moment decisions that are contributing to higher margins in the supply chain. That's a fact.
Right.
So that's a normal part of our business, I would say, ecosystem. But the other part I would also keep in mind is, I tend to look at regulations as being not good. I mean, I don't want to be in trouble with everybody up here on the stage, but if you take the EU, for example, the EU, they're quoted as saying they have the best regulations for AI, but no AI. Yeah. That's okay. Yes. So I think that's a telling sort of paradigm there. You need to allow these technologies, give them the space to actually develop before you start thinking about how to regulate them. And I think that's where, I think their strategic response is what is important. In Europe, they've commissioned the Draghi Report. Are they going to basically strategically go after these reforms and reduce the red tape? That's a strategy. Two, in the GCC, okay, the conflict in the Red Sea has been around for a while. COVID was there beforehand. I think you're starting to see between the Kingdom and other players in the Gulf, obviously much more robust investment in the supply chain. There's new shipping companies, there's like ADNOC LNS, there's Bahri, so there's a proliferation of investment in supply chain. If you look at the Vision 2030, it's all about the supply chain. They're putting in trains to overcome some of the kind of the issues that you're facing in the Red Sea, and clearly the Red Sea issue is not something that's a temporary problem. I think people recognize how easy it is to actually disrupt trade in the Red Sea. It's going to be something that we're going to have to live with for now to eternity. The only response that will work there is building infrastructure that kind of circumvents the Red Sea. That's why you're seeing trains, that's why you're seeing different transportation systems, and that's a sort of response, a strategic response to these initiatives that they're going to win in the long run. We're also seeing large companies already building logistics facilities in Jeddah. These are companies that never before would have invested there. They're doing it because they need to have spare parts that can service both Europe and the Far East, but to take advantage of that supply chain. So these are the things that are always happening in this.
That's fantastic. I mean, thank you for reminding us all that technology isn't purely software, right? When we talk about trade tech, we have potential huge advances in transport technology, faster trains, drones that carry stuff, satellites that monitor. Yes. So there's this whole infrastructure, technology infrastructure that could really boost trade. And I think our region is at the cusp of benefiting from that with all the trains and things going on. So that's actually a very optimistic note and will open a lot of opportunities. But going back to Johanna, from a World Trade Organization perspective, your opening notes mentioned, faster trade isn't the only objective or it's about fairness. It's, we don't want 1% rich countries, the 80-20 is becoming more like 5-95 now. So you think technology will help in a faster, more equitable trading system, or it will polarize even more between the rich and the consumers?
I think that trade in general is a great tool for inclusivity, right? And if you add technology to the trade, then the opportunities for inclusivity are even bigger. So the question is, how do we work together to make sure that trade and technology can be a vehicle of opportunity? And we have done a number of reports that look at these issues from different areas. One is called Digital Trade for Development. Another one is Services Trade for Development, how developing countries can harness services trade to go farther up the development ladder. And then we have done some more focused work. The latest one is called Digital Trade in Africa, and we have worked with the World Bank in 6 countries as pilots to see what the situation is at the local level, so that they can benefit from these multilateral rules, regulations, and opportunities. And what we do find is that, yes, there is a digital divide. Countries are working on the infrastructure, skills development. Regulations is also something that they are working on, so that they can trade better and trade faster. But we also see that through AI, the opportunities are even bigger. Opportunities for inclusivity, but opportunities to be left behind. And we see AI being such a game changer at the Secretariat that it can even change some of the comparative advantages as we know them. So we, our economists, have looked at this in different ways. And one scenario is what would happen if there's a global convergence in the adoption of AI? Right. What would happen? And we would see a big boost to export growth, both in developing and developed economies. In the case of low-income countries, the models show a positive effect of tech convergence could propel AI-induced trade growth by as much as between 5.5 to 7.8% trade growth. And developed economies or high-income countries, this figure would be between 1.5 and 2.4. And so we see it as a positive but cautious note. in the sense that we need to work together to make sure that the digital divide narrows so that more countries can take advantage of the tech opportunities.
That's fantastic. I mean, your point about everybody would benefit is easy to forget, right? Because we all want to compete. Every country wants to have the best system, and we think of a competition as a closed loop system where I have to be better than you. Whereas we have to remember, again, trade is a team game. So for all of us to benefit, so there's something about collaboration and competition at the same time, the old competition kind of Harvard stuff, which is very fine line. Talking about fine lines, I want to bring Dino in the conversation. I feel like my good friend Becky Anderson from CNN is like trying to ask provocative questions, but these are not provocative for the sake of the panel. These are genuine questions. I mean, Tariq mentioned this idea of over-regulating, right? You can over-regulate to the point where if you have fantastic regulations for AI companies would leave you, and somebody else will benefit. But then if you don't have regulations, then you will fall prey to privacy, security. So from your perspective and the clients you talk to, governments and others at Baker McKinsey, what do you see the right balance is? Is it sandboxes? Is it quick regulation? Are we going to see an age of experimental regulation where we change until we get to the right space? Because technology is moving so fast. Nobody's waiting for regulations from what we see. What's the right balance?
Yeah, no, that's right. I think the balance is quite tricky. I think from my experience of 20 plus years as a lawyer, corporate clients, companies, they don't like uncertainty. We've said that, but also they don't like a gap. And I don't think they mind regulation as long as it's sensible regulation. I think if you've got a regulation, if you've got a regulatory framework for something like data, for many years we haven't had in this region data protection laws, and that's made it quite difficult for me to advise clients. Well, when they say to me, "Can I do this in the Middle East?" It's like, well, there's nothing that says you can't, but there's nothing that specifically says you can. Once you get a sensible framework in and you put a data protection law, those questions become easier to answer. It becomes easier for me to give certainty to my clients to say, actually, you can do this. These are the steps you have to follow, and yes, there are compliance steps, but you know that once you follow those steps, you're all good. So I think sensible regulation is key. I think regulation that for a country reflects its place in the world. I mean, it's easy for the EU as a block of 20 plus member states to issue quite stringent regulations on something like AI, and it takes quite a sort of strict approach, knowing that companies aren't going to ignore the EU. But I think for smaller jurisdictions acting on their own, somewhere like the UAE, it's a big player in many ways, but it's also a country with a small population. And we have to kind of recognize that. So we shouldn't have necessarily the same set of rules that the EU does for here. And I think if there's a trend that I see, it's that multinationals are increasingly sophisticated in how they look at global regulation. You've got a choice of, do I take the sort of, if I've got differing regulations, different levels of regulation, do I take the highest standard and apply it across the board? Perhaps increasing my costs, but at least I know I'm compliant. Or do I sort of take perhaps a more one-size-fits-most type of rule? So I do what's generally good and take a view on enforcement risks and make a commercial decision on other cases. I think companies do have to look at that. They become increasingly sophisticated about making those decisions. But also they are looking at, recognizing that the world is mobile, the world is connected, and why should I be tied to one place if the regulatory environment somewhere is more inviting? If it's better for me, whether it's from a tax incentive point of view, whether it's from helping me with data flows, whether it's helping me with mining and AI training. If I've got a regulatory environment that supports that, I'm going to go to that. So we've worked with several governments in the region on looking at how to make those legal environments a sort of enabler of business. And more attractive to create an environment that does promote investment.
Right. So thank you for that, because I think, first of all, Tim has moved seats, which means we're out of time for the session. So I'm going to do a final round of about 30 seconds, a question each. And I'm going to start with you, Dino. In terms of global regulation on technology and emerging technologies, what is the end game realistically? Are we going to wait until the WTO and others find a global set of frameworks? Or is it more of the EU countries who think alike sort of work alike, and companies have to face multiple regulations. In your very practical, pragmatic trajectory, not what we would like to see, but what you would think we would see in the next 5 years. What's the end game here?
As I said before, I think countries have their own competitive interests, their own take on things, and they will continue to do that. I think it would be nice to say that we can regulate technology or anything actually consistently across many countries or across the world, but in reality that doesn't happen. And so there will always be these differences, these challenges. Technology moves quickly, moves much faster than law and regulation, as we've said. So we're always playing catch up in that sense. But I think it's kind of, countries, jurisdictions that take the sensible approach, that allow for innovation, that regulate where they need to. Not always light touch, but regulate what they have to regulate, and give companies that certainty will be the ones that are successful going forward.
Thank you. No, I think that's very pragmatic, and I think it's the green standards and the sustainability standardization around the world and the changes give us a fairly good look of what might happen between the fragmentation and potential. So for the other three panelists, the final question is: we are in AIM, the investment conference. So what would you invest in the next couple of years when it comes to trade technology? Is it skills, infrastructure, nothing, wait and see until things settle down, more collaboration, negotiation? I'll start with Özlem and work backwards. What would you invest in the moving forward to help customs up the game?
Definitely, I will start with cooperation and collaboration. As an international organization, of course, I would first focus on the cooperation at international level, but this could also go to the cooperation at the national level. And when it comes to, again, future, I would invest on people. Because as I said in my previous answers, technology is also mostly about people. Because when we talk about, for example, the role of customs people after the involvement of the technologies in customs, there is a huge worry among customs people. Like me, I'm also a customs officer. What will be my future? Technology will not change my future. It will change my future, but it will only change my roles and responsibilities. That's why, to answer that question, I would also focus and invest on people, in addition to cooperation and also capacity building. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Always amazing how we always end up with talking about people. We start with technology and it always ends up with humans and people. Tariq, fourth, fifth, and sixth, and party logistics, and your sector is just 3D drones. What would you invest in?
So I think there is a big component to investing in people to basically get them ready to figure out how to use AI. And that's not just, that's across the board. Even at the board level, management level, I think there's a lot of work to be done. One thing I'm concerned about, and then I'll kind of respond to where we're investing, is that I'm concerned that this round of trade strife is going to lead to a tax on digital services. In other words, if I were playing chess, and it's one thing to put on tariffs. Maybe the U.S. doesn't produce that much in terms of goods and services, but if somebody were really game planning this, you can just see that look down the road. There's going to be a tax on digital services coming, right? And I actually, while we were talking, I actually put that in ChatGPT, and it says who are the countries that would lose most from a tax on digital services, and there it is. So with that in mind, I think it makes sense to invest also in technologies that are leveraging AI, but also have less to do with kind of this global trade strife. And I'll give you a couple of, just a quick example. We're investing in a technology. There's a company that makes a handheld device that scans for breast cancer. Basically, it uses AI. It's going to be done in a community setting. Completely changes the supply chain around detecting cancer. That sort of investment is something that's not necessarily going to be impacted by global trade strife, and there's a lot of opportunity for it to grow. So, irrespective of what happens with barriers or what have you, that sort of investment has a lot of, I would say.
You're investing in that?
Yeah.
Fantastic. This is the kind of world we're in now, right? Technology is opening up so many opportunities that it's almost difficult to contain yourself to one place and everything is changing. Supply chains of everything is literally changing. So it's, you know, so how do you make it? How do you make it a fairer world as we go ahead? What do you invest in your time in the next year, apart from firefighting?
I think it's important to invest in the world trading system as a whole.
Yes.
I think it's been taken for granted a bit, if not a lot, in the last few decades, and it's important to refocus and reinvest in the world trading system, not only from the government point of view, but all of the actors in the economy, the private sector, think tanks, and other groups that benefit from an open world trading system. And I think that a lot of the things that we've talked about today, I think two things I find important. One, the world trading system, the rules that already exist, facilitate the adoption and diffusion of technology. And it's important to keep those lanes open. Negotiations are one part of the World Trade Organization, but they're not the only thing that we do. We do a lot of implementing agreements, a lot of trade capacity building, bringing actors together, being a forum for discussion, even discussing difficult things. So I think the focus has to be in cooperate where that is possible, and where discussions need to be had, we also need to invest in that, in recognizing where the problems are, facing them up, and trying to facilitate conversations between governments to find solutions. I know it's easy to say and very difficult to do, but not because of that are we going to pull back at all.
Thank you. I think we're going to conclude on this note thinking that what's unbelievably important now is to be able to sit back on the table and talk, because again, you know, trade is a global game. Everybody either benefits together or loses together. I don't think there's a winner in global trade if everybody else benefits. But look, what I promised you at the beginning is we won't have as many answers as questions, but I think we got some interesting answers and things to invest in. And I would love to have the same session with the four of you next year to see how much our world has changed, because I think it will change, and I'm hoping it's for the better. Thank you so much, Johanna, Özlem, Tariq, and Dino, for this fantastic conversation. Thank you.